All right, all right, all right. I am back. Whew. Okay, it is 7 p.m. Friday. Okay, no, just kidding. It's not 7 p.m. Friday. It's actually 2:29 Friday. And, I got to do this YouTube content at specific times. But what I started doing is actually scheduling it every week. I'm trying to build consistency here. Okay, so I need you to be proud of me, and that's about it. So, okay, let's talk about this property. That was my fourth acquisition. So this is part 2, right? So we talked about the one that I bought sight unseen, how my realtor was really looking out for me and presented this to me before she even put it on the market, which is amazing, right? And what I did with that property, this is the one that I turned into Airbnb. This was in North Carolina. And at first it was good, going well. And it never really went bad. I mean, Airbnb is Airbnb. So there's that. Guests are guests. They're going to do what they're going to do. But eventually I felt like I was just breaking even, So when I looked at the numbers and the fact that every few months it seemed like I had to do some sort of repair or replace something, and it was just really cutting into my bottom line. And I was like, all right, I don't enjoy this. I enjoy profits. So I was like, all right, I have to change up my strategy. So I decided to do a furnished long-term rental. So this is that same property where I was telling you, like, I was skeptical because the tenant that I was reviewing had like 5 evictions, but it turns out that those weren't really her evictions. Like, those were evictions because her parents had used her name and didn't pay rent and got evicted, while she was younger. So anyway, had that tenant. It was great. But then she decided to move out, and I was like, all right, what I can do is I can try to find another tenant for furnished and keep it going. But I remember from before, everyone wanted the unit to be vacant, right? So it was a little challenging the first time around trying to get someone who wanted a furnished rental. So I was like, do I want to deal with that, or do I just want to sell it and use the proceeds for something else? I wavered a little bit, went back and forth, and I finally decided, you know what? I have some big expenses coming up. I have some investment plans coming up. I'm just going to sell it. So what I did was I was like, all right, let me just calculate what my potential profit would be. And then I just gave all those, I divided the money into buckets, and every dollar got a job, right? So, but before we get there, let's talk about the sale process. Okay, so this is the first house I've ever sold, right? So breaking news, is sold. Okay, so that was one of my concerns too, because it was sitting on the market for some months, and it just seemed like, well, not some months, it was some weeks, which is okay. The realtor told me it's probably going to be 2 to 3 weeks before you get an offer, and I was like, okay, I could do 2 to 3 weeks. But it was like the 4th week, and there were a lot of visits and showings, but no offers. And so then we started lowering the price, and then in that time period, 2 other houses on the same block went up for sale, and I was just like, oh, how annoying. And they were same bedrooms, same bathrooms, but they weren't as updated as mine. So that definitely gave me an edge, and my price was a little bit higher. So I didn't feel that I needed to lower it that much, but I wasn't excited about competition, So there's 3 houses on the same block for sale, same size. I'm just like, okay. So we're at like the 5th week or something, and crazy thing, the tenant that had moved out reached out to me like, hey, this situation it's not really working out. Is there any way I can move back in? And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And so I told her, it's listed on the market. We've had some interest. If I don't get an offer in the next 2 weeks, it's yours. And so this is early December, I think it was, or was it late November, somewhere around that. And so she's like, okay, bet, great. So lo and behold, the next week I got an offer. It's like, oh, thank you, Jesus. So I got an offer. They offered me asking price. So I was happy about that. However, these scallywags wanted $6,000 toward closing costs. And mind you, I had not taken out the furniture. So some of the furniture I sold to that tenant who moved out. And so she had put it in storage, but she didn't take everything. So they wanted me to pay $6,000 toward their closing costs, and they wanted to keep all my furniture. And I was just like, y'all asking for a lot, you know? But at the same time, I'm like, all right, another house on that same block had gone up for sale. So now it's 4 houses on the block for sale. So that added a little pressure. And then I was the only one with an offer. And I was like, ooh, I don't want to mess this up. But at the same time, if I agreed to the 6,000 and giving them my furniture, like it was really cutting into my profits. And I had already allocated all those dollars, right? You know, I already had plans for them. So it wasn't really going to work. So I told the realtor, like, okay, look, how about we let them have some of that for closing costs, but not all of it. They can keep the furniture. And she was like, okay, I'll tell them and see what they say. So while she made that offer, she got a little bit more information from the buyer's agent. And turns out the buyer's agent was very motivated because they were selling the property of a family member, and that family member happened to be staying with them. And they wanted to get this family member out of their house. And I was just like, interesting. And then another piece was, this was an FHA loan and the couple didn't have a lot of savings. And so that's why they were essentially asking for closing costs so that they can close out the transaction and still have enough wiggle room. And they needed the furniture because they were unsure about if they'd have enough money to, you know, get all the furniture. And I was like, wow, okay. Very interesting. Good to know. So we're both motivated, right? We have a motivated buyer. We have a motivated seller. That's me. So I was like, okay. Meanwhile, they accept my counter offer and we're in motion, right? So I've bought a house enough times to know that, you know, it's just unpredictable. You just never know, right? So when you're buying a house, which is what I'm used to, you're going through the due diligence and you're, you know, looking at the inspection report. You're trying to negotiate, blah, 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 blah. And this was, according to my realtor, a buyer's market. So I was primed to not expect a ton of, I guess, flexibility from the buyer. And so I was prepared to fight. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm like, all right, we under contract. We both motivated. But I know how this goes. This ain't my first rodeo. This is my first time selling. But this ain't my first rodeo, right? So I'm like, all right, they gonna do their due diligence and they gonna get an inspection. They gonna try to hit me with the inspection report because I've done this, okay? I'm not new to this. I'm true to this. So I was like, all right, they gonna hit me with the inspection report. They gonna ask me for all these repairs. This may or may not work because, again, I have a profit goal in mind and I've already allocated those dollars. So I'm just like, all right, you know, I'm praying. I'm like, look, I know this is unlikely and asking a lot, Jesus, but if we could get through this transaction smoothly without me having to pay anything else, that would be perfect. All right, say my prayer. All right, keep it pushing. The crazy thing about selling a property is there's so much less interaction, you know, like I feel like a lot of the communication when you're buying is like loan documents and you're talking with the lender, you're communicating with underwriting, you're talking to your realtor, you're talking to inspectors, you're talking to appraisers. There's so much communication. On the seller side, it's just ghost. I ain't hear nothing for weeks. So, okay, now I'm remembering. The due diligence period ended January 10th. So it was around, I think it was early December. I think I was on my way to either Hawaii or Mexico or something. And that's when we went under contract. So the due diligence period was supposed to end January 10th. So I'm thinking, all right, they're either going to do the inspection and the other due diligence they need to do before the holidays or immediately after the holidays because they have until the 10th, right? So we go under contract. I don't hear anything, right? Look, the days go by. I'm traveling in and out the country. Christmas passes, New Year's passes. I don't hear anything. I don't hear about an inspection report. I don't hear about anyone trying to get repairs, negotiations. So I'm just wondering, like, are we still good? Like, what's going on? Reach out to the realtor. She's like, yeah, everything's good. I haven't heard anything. I hope they're doing their due diligence. And I was like, okay, well, I'll just wait until the 10th, because basically the 10th, once that passes and they ain't ask me for nothing, I know I'm in the clear. You know what I mean? And so given how much and how aggressive I am during due diligence, I really expected to get a lot of questions, to, you know, a lot of back and forth, to request for documentation, something, and nothing. So then January 8th, I think, rolls around, and I'm just like, look, this is crazy. I mean, I guess it's not so crazy. I did say a prayer, you know? So I was like, look, this is the answer. The answer is it's going to be smooth. Everything's good. That's what I was hoping. But I was like, oh, it's January 8th. I hope they don't try to hit me 2 days before the due diligence period ends, asking me for some repairs, because I'm going to be pissed. So I get a call from my realtor, or no, she texts me saying, hey, call me when you get a chance. And I'm like, oh, here we go. So this is like January 8th, 2 days before due diligence ends. So I call her and she's like, yeah, they got their inspection report. And I'm like, ooh, like, so I had like a jump in my heart. I was like, oh, here we go. All them times I didn't use the inspection report to negotiate, it's coming back to me. So she's like, yeah, you know, there wasn't much in there. It was just minor things. And I was like, okay, this sounds good. We're getting somewhere. And she's like, yeah. And I told them, you know, it's not a good idea to ask the seller to fix anything, because she's already paying for your closing costs, basically, or most of them. And it's 2 days before the due diligence period ends. I don't think, and none of these things are really important. These are all things you can take care of yourself, right? And she was like, and I'm telling you, if you ask the seller, meaning me, if you ask the seller for any of these repairs, she's probably not going to do them. And so I was like, okay, girl, you tell them that I ain't going to do it. Okay. You advocate. So I'm listening to her, you know, she's telling me this. And so that's the 8th. Now we're waiting. Okay. We're waiting for the buyer's agent to respond. So then I find out on later that day, the appraisal came in, and that was $5,000 lower than what they offered. And again, they ain't got no money. They ain't got no savings. And I'm just like, okay. So now they're asking me to lower the price by $5,000. And I'm just like, look, if I lower the price, I am definitely, absolutely repairing nothing. Like nothing. Because I'm already paying a good amount of your closing costs, and you're taking my furniture. I'm not also going to lower the price for you. Like, no, it's just no. And, you know, at this point, I know I need to be more reasonable, but you didn't brought me this far. You had plenty of time to do this kind of due diligence, to check things, whatever. And you're going to wait 2 days before to ask me to do this kind of stuff. Like, I was actually irritated. So anyway, I'm like, I told her, look, I will lower the price in service of selling this house. It is cutting into my profits, but I'll take the high road and lower the price, but I am not making any repairs. So she's like, all right, understood. She sends that information to the buyer's agent, and the 8th passes, the 9th arrives. I hear nothing. Now, mind you, I was getting married on the 11th. So wasn't really thinking about none of this after the 8th. I was just like, look, I have so many things to do. I have a wedding coming up. LA was on fire. Ash falling all over the house, and I'm supposed to be having a wedding in the backyard. Like, the last thing I'm thinking about is selling this house in North Carolina. So it was January 10th, the day before my wedding. Hear back from the buyer's agent. And mind you, this is the last day for due diligence. Buyer's agent, okay, we're going to accept the inspection as is. We're not asking for any repairs, and the buyers are thankful that she's willing to lower the price. I was like, wow. That was unexpected, honestly. Like, I really thought they was going to try me, and they didn't. And I love that for them. And I love that for me. So they didn't try me. I was like, all right, bet, great. This is great news before I'm about to get married. And then the buyer's agent was like, you know, any little repairs that were suggested in the inspection report, he's just going to repair himself. Because remember, the buyer's agent is motivated to get the buyers out of his house. I was like, wow, you know, Jesus, you really did your thing right here. Like, you really showed up for me. Like, I just love that. I just love the power of prayer. But anyway, let me not get off topic. So I was actually shocked. Like, I've never had a transaction where I was buying something and I did not ask for something based on the inspection report. So I just felt so blessed, so happy. And yeah, you know, so the 10th comes, that's gone, you know, due diligence period's over. Then on the 10th, 11th, 12th, I was scheduled to fly out on the 15th for an international trip. Now I told my agent, look, because closing was scheduled for the 21st. I said, look, okay, I'm going to be flying out. I'm going to be in another country. I need closing to stay on the 21st or basically be before the 15th. So she's like, okay, cool. She communicated that, whatever. So, you know, I'm packing and stuff, getting ready to go. And on the 14th, I get that text, call me when you can. I said, okay, here we go. So I call her. She's like, tell me why I just found out from the buyer's attorney that they're trying to close tomorrow. I said, tomorrow? The day that I fly out? How? Like, how? Please help me understand. Like, I clearly communicated that I could close before the 15th or after the 21st. So help me understand how we got here. Like, she was like, I don't know. This is so crazy. I've never in my 20 something years experienced, you know, them telling me the day before closing, like, you haven't even done this and this. I was like, ooh, okay, look. I was like, what do you need me to do for closing? Because like at this point, I don't know. I've never sold. I've never done a closing where I'm selling something, right? So I don't know if it's like when you're buying and the notary comes to your house and has to do all this and this and that. I don't know. So she's like, all I need you to do is review the final documents and sign. And I was like, okay, well, what does that signing process look like? And she was like, it's literally an e-sign. I said, oh, I could do that, like, easy. And so she's like, all right, let me make some calls and figure this out. So meanwhile, look, I'm packed up. I'm getting ready to go. Now, the morning of the 15th, before I leave, she's like, all right, it's very early. She's like, I sent you the documents to review. I was like, I'm headed to the airport. Literally, I was in the car headed to the airport, and I was like, all right, I will look at them when I get to the airport. And she was just like, oh, I'm so sorry about this. I was like, it's not your fault. Get to the airport, you know, check in, whatever. I had like 45 minutes, I think, before my flight. So got into the lounge, looked at the documents. There was a mistake. Told her, hey, whoever wrote this address is wrong. I don't know how they had like my home address, but they had the right street address, but the city was like Atlanta, Georgia. And I was like, huh? Like, I don't live in Atlanta. I was confused. Anyway, so they had to fix that. Then she hurried up and sent it to them. They hurried up and sent it back. And I signed minutes before boarding started. Crazy. So I was like, is that it? Like, is that all that I have to do? She was like, yeah, you already gave your wire info. You know, this is the last thing you have to sign. Now we're just waiting for the sellers to sign. And congratulations. I was like, whoa, ain't no congratulations until I see the money hit the account. And she was like, no, you're right, because there's been times where sellers backed out the day of closing. I was like, yeah. I mean, where buyers backed out the day of closing, and I was like, yeah, let's just do congratulations when we actually get there. And she was like, okay, yeah, I'll let you know when they sign and when everything's good. And I was like, all right. So I fly out. Then on the 16th, I'm in another country. I get a message or email, I think it was. No, it was a text. I got a text from her, and she's like, congratulations, they did sign. You're good. And I was like, oh, thank you, Jesus. So in the end, I was only $2,000 shy of my profit goal. So that was actually not bad. So I had to do a slight adjustment, but not really, because in that profit goal, I had accounted for taxes. So basically, I ended up just paying a little less in taxes because I made a little less profit, but all the other things I allocated worked out. So I was really happy about that. I was a little sad, like selling the property. I've never sold anything, and there's a little bit of attachment there. But when that money hit my account, I was over it.